Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. If you're new, I'm Maddie. I'm a UX UI designer and currently a creative resident at Adobe. Here on YouTube, I make videos about design and productivity, so if you're into those things, feel free to hit subscribe. This video is a little bit long, but if you're serious about getting a job in product design or UI UX, then I highly encourage you to watch the whole thing. I'm gonna be sharing some tips, and then I'm gonna get into reviewing 3 portfolios that I think you guys are gonna learn so much from. All right, before we get into the portfolios, I do wanna share a few tips, and these are from my personal experience, but also just from talking to people at Adobe and people I've met through Adobe who actually hire UI UX designers. So yeah, these are just some things that I have learned that I wanted to share. Number 1 is always have a clear goal in mind. So I asked you all if you wanted to send me your portfolio to also send me the goal of your portfolio, because that really matters in terms of how successful your portfolio is going to be. A portfolio meant to get clients is really different from one meant to get a full-time job. So get really clear on what you want your career to look like in the next few years, and then go from there in terms of curating your portfolio. The next tip is to treat it like a design project in itself. It should solve a problem, which is really the goal that I was just talking about before. And it should be really easy for the specific user or hiring manager, potential client, to move through it and carry out the intention that they set forth to carry out when they opened up your portfolio link. Third thing is that your process is even more important than the end product. And lastly, details count. So make sure everything is really easy to read and you've weeded out any typos or just glitches in your website. Okay, I know I was really brief in talking about those 4 tips, but I want to get more deep into them with these actual real examples of your portfolios. So let's get into them. Let's jump into Emma's portfolio. She told me that her goal is to get a UI UX job in the tech industry. So with that, let's look at what she's got. So first, let's talk about her portfolio as a whole. So I like how she has her introduction here. Then if you scroll down, she has these different sections of just different types of design: UX, UI, and illustration. And she keeps it really simple, which I love. So let's go in and look at what she's got in the UX category. And this is sort of how they're organized. And one thing that I want to point out about this sort of project index page is that I find these projects to be a little bit too close together. As you can see, they're kind of bumping right up against each other. This line of text is too small and too long. So I would make this entire section just a little bit less wide. I would bring it in, make this text smaller, and just generally have more space in between all of them. I think that will just make them look more enticing. Also, I've noticed that you have case study as a label, but it seems like maybe they're all case studies. Maybe once you add more that are real projects for clients, then you'll bring in another category. But I guess that's just a bit confusing to me that they're all labeled as case study. And yeah, that's about all I have to say about this index page. Let's dive into the first project. Okay, this is Parent Pod. So I'm going to skip past some of this stuff. She did some research here. And what I want to ask Emma is, how did your market research inform your ideas and your designs? I really like here how she kind of notes these different UI elements and says inspiration from Sitter City, inspiration from Dribble. And so she's noting where she got inspiration for these UI elements. But I want to know specifically on this market research page or section where she is examining some current apps in the market, I want to know what she took away from these. So instead of just describing what they are here, I want to know what you learned from them, maybe what the gaps are, and in terms of solving the big picture, what did you take away from researching these 3 things? And then similarly, moving down to the hi-fi prototype, I love seeing these animated prototypes. I think that's really great. But similarly to what I said before, I really would love to see a brief written explanation of how these designs could solve the problem. I really like the key learning section down here. Wait, where is it? I think it's actually at the very bottom. I really like this key learning section, but I would like to see a tie-in with the parent pod project specifically. You talk a lot about your key learnings about the process, and sort of just creating this case study in general and doing this project, but I want to know specifically from Parent Pod what key learnings came out of this. Okay, now let's go into another project. I don't have time to talk about all of them, but I do want to talk about redesigning Duolingo. To give context to those who have not looked at this project, basically she is solving some different problems which she defined and laid out really nicely with Duolingo. She did research and she's doing, I think it's 3 different redesigns based on her research. And so she defined very specific problems, and then she's going through and redesigning different features or just different parts of this, adding things in to solve those problems. So one of the solutions to these problems is that she plans to add an extra screen during onboarding to indicate the desire for a structured lesson versus freeform. So she's basically adding a way to learn, and that's something that a user would need to choose during onboarding. And so what I want to point out is this screen in the prototype specifically. Would you like a structured lesson or free roam? And the options are yes or no, and that doesn't make any sense. So Emma, what you need to do is just make the structured lesson a button and make free roam a button. That way it's much more clear, because yes and no is very confusing when paired with this question. And so that's something where it might seem small, but since this is a new feature that you are suggesting, or this is basically your main solution to this problem, then it needs to be really clear. If someone's looking through this, then they're not going to understand, and the usability is going to be totally thrown off. And so that's something that's really important to fix. Okay, next I want to move into the About page. And with this page, what I would really like is for your photo to be here, because when you click on About Me, personally, I think that it is so important to have a photo of your face there, because recruiters or hiring managers, or even like a design team that is looking at your portfolio is really going to want to be able to connect with you and put a face to the name. The last thing I want to suggest for Emma and for everybody is to go through your case studies and your website in general with a fine-tooth comb. Go through and look for mistakes like this, where the sentence is going off the page, you've got an overlapping title. That's not happening a lot of places, but it is happening a few places, and I've also caught a couple typos. So just go through, look at those things. I know sometimes it can be hard to catch those since you've been working on this so long. So give the site to a friend and tell them to go through and see if they wouldn't mind giving you some feedback or proofreading your work, because those are the types of things that won't reflect well on you if you're applying for a job. They're going to look for someone detail oriented. So make sure that you're paying attention to those details and catching those things. Okay, I said this was the last thing, but there's one more thing I want to mention. I just went to look at your resume and I noticed that this copy is completely illegible. It's just too small and too light. So definitely go in and darken the color of those things. Again, it seems small, but when it comes to choosing a designer for a tech company's design team, they're going to want someone who knows that you have to use ADA compliant colors and contrast, and you know how to make something legible and accessible. And so those are the things that you don't want to ignore. So definitely go in and change these things, just make them darker and make sure that they are accessible to read. Okay, next we're going to look at Amira's site. And Amira's goal for this website is to attract clients for freelancing and find a full-time job as a UI UX designer. So I want to start off with that, with her goal, because I think it's really important to get this right. The portfolio site of someone who's looking for freelance clients and the portfolio site of someone looking for full-time employment should actually look very different. So I would suggest for you, Amira, and for anyone out there watching who hasn't really done this, to really sit down and think about your goals. Where do you want your career to go in the next year or two? So, Amira, if freelancing is the direction you want to go, I'd recommend thinking about the types of companies that you want to have as clients and curating your website to really speak directly to them. If you decide that full-time employment is the direction you want to go, then curate your website so that it appeals to a hiring manager or a recruiter or a design team at a tech company. What might their needs be based on the job description? What might they want to see? And what might help you stand out? So what I'm saying is curate your portfolio based on the position that you want. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself or niche down if you don't want to, but you do need to be intentional about the projects that you take on, the ones you do for practice to add to your portfolio, and ultimately the ones that you're showcasing. Okay, so with all that said, I will go through and critique some of this website. So I think that she can do a lot after she decides what her goals are, but there are still some things that I would love to point out. So first, I would say that work is actually more important than about or skills. So as you can see, this is just a one-page scrolling site until you get into the project details pages. And so you kind of have to go down pretty far to get to the work. So I would just switch these two things, work and about, and that would solve that problem. Also, when you get down to this work section and you hover over these projects, you can see that the whole section turns pink on hover, but it's not clickable. I'm trying to click here and it's not clickable. I then notice that there's this little button in the right-hand bottom corner. And so my advice would just be to make this whole section clickable. You don't have to add a button if you're already adding a hover effect. That's going to indicate to users that this is clickable. So just make it all clickable so that they don't have to go searching down in the corner for this. The last thing about the site as a whole that I want to note is that whenever you do click into a project details page, this navigation bar changes, which is a bit confusing and I don't love that. And not only that, but if you go back to work to see the rest of the projects, it doesn't take you to work, it takes you to home. And so I would definitely fix that because then it takes 2 clicks instead of just 1 to get the user where they want to go. Okay, so now I want to talk about this SRC system project specifically. There's just a couple things that I would recommend. So since this is a redesign, I would like to see the original experience. You could point out specific areas in which the original design falls short of the goal. And I'd also like to see a brief explanation of how your research informed the design decisions that you made. So you're showing me what all you did, but I'm not necessarily seeing how everything you did informed the final designs. And that's something that is really common that I'm seeing across all 3 of these portfolios and honestly most that I look at. And so yeah, I would highly recommend really thinking about each step, how it added to the process, how it informed your decisions, and explaining that. Okay, last we're gonna look at Vineel's portfolio, and his goal is to get hired by a tech company where design is valued and in the forefront. So I'm seeing here that he describes himself as a UX UI designer. So if you're describing yourself as a UX UI designer, I want to see UX UI both UX and UI present in every single project. And so either I want to see that, or I want to see them as Emma has them broken up into two categories. So she has UX where she uses both UX and UI, and she has a separate section for UI design where these things are focused on UI styles, animations, and things like that, where UX is not really considered. It's more just the UI. And so I really like how that is split up in hers. With Vineel's, I would recommend to take a page out of Emma's book and do that, or make sure that every project you're including has UX and UI elements. So for example, this Assassin's Creed webpage redesign, it doesn't have any UX elements. It's purely a redesign of a website that already exists. There's not a whole lot of navigation, which is totally fine, but it's clearly a UI project, not a UX project. And so if I were you, Vineel, I would break that up into a different category where it's just UI, so that your UX deep case studies where you're doing research and you're showing before and after and all of that stuff, so that they're separated, because as it is, these projects aren't of equal caliber. And so, yeah, I would recommend splitting them up. Or if you're really into getting a UX job, you may just not include this because it's really just a facelift. I would focus on things like this, where you're really doing a deep dive into the research and every single step that you have done for this. That is like a completely different type of project, if that makes sense. And along with that, if you do decide to include some UI redesigns of websites and apps, I would show the before and after and explain why you made certain design decisions and why you, like what improvements you've made and why you made them, because that really shows design thinking as opposed to just a visual style that you're changing. Okay, so like I mentioned, this Casa co-living case study is excellent. I really like how deep he went with it and how it's fun to read. He varies up the textiles and the communication styles, but it still feels consistent. So one thing that I would recommend changing is actually the way that some of it is written. So each section begins with a heading and a few lines of text. And as you can see in those lines of text, he's basically just defining the step in the process. He explains what a persona is, what usability testing is, etc., instead of detailing how he specifically propelled his project forward during each step. So think about who's going to be looking at your portfolio. And in Vineel's case, this is hiring managers for design teams within a tech company. So think about it. They already know what a persona is. You don't have to explain that to them. So use this case study to go deep on what you specifically did for your project. One thing I want to add is that Vineel basically broke these up into some different case studies. You have the full case study, UI design for iOS, UI design for Android, and a landing page. I would lump all of those together because it really is the same project and it shows a lot of breadth and it shows how deep you could go. And so I think that's excellent, but I wouldn't break it up like this because it just looks repetitive and a bit confusing. And then what I would do is spend some time doing another case study or two like this. So this is the only one you have that goes really deep, and I would recommend doing at least 2 more before you go applying to tech companies, because they don't just want to see that you've done one project, they want to see that you have a lot of different types of skills and you're able to repeat this process, but also change it in ways that make sense and use your own judgment to do this a bunch of different ways instead of just with one project. So give them some more evidence as to what your skills and strengths are by showing at least 2 more projects. All right, friends, I really hope that that video was helpful for you. If you want, I will continue to do these portfolio reviews maybe once every month or two. So feel free to DM me on Instagram or leave a comment below if you have questions about portfolios or if you want to share your portfolio link for me to review next time. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.